Before we get any further into our wiring unit and our electrical unit, I just wanted to take a little closer look at some of the wiring components that you're going to be using if you're going to be doing any basic wiring within your homes. Now, I know some of you have had the opportunity to help your family members out. Maybe you did some wiring in the garage or the barn, or helped rewire a lamp, or even maybe helped with your house. Others of you have never actually taken a close look at what does an outlet actually look like when it's away from the wall? Or what does a switch look like when it's away from the wall? So I want to get everybody on the same page before we go any further so you kind of have an idea. It's a very simple concept when it comes to wiring, but you have an idea of what the components are that we're going to be using. First thing is I want to take a look at some of the equipment that you might need. Now, you can use all different types of things. It doesn't have to be anything real fancy. Some of this just makes life a little easier when you're dealing with wiring. So one of the neatest things that I discovered was this is a jacket stripper. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the outside insulation off of wire. And you don't need it, but the way it works is you can see there's a tooth on the inside there. It's going to clamp down and it's going to cut through the insulation so that then you can peel it back and you have the wire accessible to you. So a really good tool to be able to help you out with that. You definitely want a set of needle nose pliers. You're going to need a set of wire cutters, sometimes called cross side cuts or dikes, and then some type of wire stripper. These are both wire strippers that are going to take the insulation off the wire on the inside, and they do the same thing. They just look a little different companies that produce them. Now I want to take a few seconds and talk about the different type of wire. First off, wire is sized by the gauge. Most of the time what we use in our homes is what we call 14 gauge wire. And the bigger the number, the smaller the wire gauge. So if you look at the edge of this stripper here, this is going to be the size of a 14 gauge wire. This is going to be 12 gauge, 10 gauge, 8 gauge, 6 gauge, and you can go all the way down. I've worked with 2 gauge wire, and so the smaller the number, the larger the wire. So this is some 14 gauge wire. This is what we're going to use most commonly in our home. This is what we call a 14-2. 14 being the size, and 2 showing that you have 2 wires that are going to carry electricity. We have the hot wire here, which is black, and then we have the neutral and return wire, which is going to be white. The bare wire is going to be our ground wire. So what makes that different than this wire? Well, obviously this one has an extra wire. This is what we call a 14-3 wire. 14 again being the size, 3 meaning that we have our black hot wire, we have a red hot wire, which is known as our common wire, we have our neutral wire, and we have our bare ground wire again. This is only going to be used in special wiring operations, particularly to wire 3-way switches. And we'll talk a little bit later about what 3-way switches are and how to wire them, but basically it's where you have 2 switches that operate the same light. So in different positions in your house or across the room from each other, you can turn a light on or off at 2 different locations. So we don't use the 14-3 that often. So what you're going to be wiring almost everything with is going to be the 14-2. Or if you're going with a larger gauge wire, you might have 12-2, 10-2, whatever size it is that you're going to use. So when you've decided that you need to wire something, what you're going to need to do is take your strippers, and you'll notice that they're sized for the different gauges of wire, and these will fit right around the wire itself and strip off the insulation that's around it. So you're going to take a hold of the wire, put it in there, tighten it or go around it, and that's going to cut it. And so what you're going to end up with is you can take the end of that wire insulation off and end up with a little bare end that you're going to then wire with. Now you don't want to take too much of the insulation off because the insulation is there to protect it from shorting out. And so just strip back what you think you're going to need to wrap around the screws that you're going to be wiring against. So you're going to do that with all the wires. You're going to strip back the outside jacket insulation, and then you're going to strip back so you can connect to the outlet or the switch that you're going to be using. When it comes to electrical work, they try to color code the wires to make it easier, so they're pretty consistent and universal. So when we take a look at our 14-2 wires, we mentioned the black wire is going to be your hot wire, the white is going to be your neutral wire, and the wire that doesn't have any insulation around it, just the bare wire, is going to be your ground. So if we compare that to the two switches we have here and the outlet, let's see how that might match up. So if I take a look at my outlet, if I notice when I look on one side, I have gold or brass screws. I look on the other side and I have silver along with a green one. So those are going to correspond to the wires that we're going to hook them up to. The gold screws match up with the hot or the black wire. The silver matches up with the white or the neutral wire. And in this case, because we do have a green, that's where the ground is going to go. When we look at a regular switch, if I take a look at one side on here, I can see I have gold screws, but I have no other screws present. So we are going to attach the black or hot wire to the gold. The neutral or white wire ends up getting hooked or spliced together. And there's no place for the ground. Sometimes on these switches there is a place to hook the ground. There's no green, so no place to hook the ground. So I would end up splicing those together. Now this other switch that I have here, you'll notice, is larger in size, and you'll notice something about the switch. This one says on off. This one has nothing written on it. That's because this is a three-way switch. And when I look at the screws, I have two gold. Now they're on opposite sides, but that's just because of the company that ended up putting this together. But there are two gold ones, just like on the other switch. You do see the ground, the green one on here, which that one could have a green. The company I bought that one off of just didn't. But then you'll also see that there is a black screw on here. That black screw is what we call the common screw, and that would be hooked to the red wire, which is only found in the 14-3 wire. So everything is going to be color coded. If you've never taken a close-up look at outlets or switches, and plugs are going to be the same way. If you're going to put an end on a wire, it's the same way. They're going to be color coded so that you know what needs to be hooked up and when it needs to be hooked up. So there's just a general background, some very basic things about wiring. We're going to get into that a little bit more, and eventually you guys will get the opportunity to do some wiring yourselves, where you'll get to put a plug on the end of a wire. You'll be able to wire up an outlet, a switch, a regular switch, a light switch, and then also a three-way switch.